For 25 years, Malcolm Turner woke up every day at 5:30 a.m. With the same silent steps, he crossed the modest house in a Chicago suburb, made his strong black coffee, and went out to face another day at the Draxon Industries factory, a medical equipment company that prided itself on family values. Malcolm was a senior maintenance technician. He wasn't just another employee. He knew every inch of the factory, every strange noise from the machines, every smell that indicated a possible leak. When something broke, the younger workers called for him like they would call for a father, and he fixed it, always, without ever complaining. More than that, Malcolm was a respected man, not only for his technical knowledge, but for his demeanor. He was never late, never absent. In an environment often hostile to black men like him, Malcolm survived with integrity. He was discreet but firm. He never got involved in gossip or intrigues, even when provoked. And yes, he was provoked many times. He knew he wasn't seen the same way as his younger colleagues, especially the recent graduates, white, who barely knew how to hold a wrench but already came with titles and promises of higher positions. But Malcolm ignored it. His mission was simple: to support his wife Evelyn and make his daughter Jenna proud, who was finishing nursing school on a full scholarship. That Friday morning, Malcolm arrived as usual, greeting the security guard at the gate with a nod. But something was strange in the air, an unusual silence, averted glances. Then, around 9 a.m., his phone rang. It was HR. A quick meeting, they said. He didn't suspect anything. He was used to emergency repairs and thought that's what it was. But when he entered the room and saw the serious faces, a manager he barely knew, a representative from the people department, and an envelope on the table, something sank in his stomach. "Malcolm, we deeply appreciate your years of service, but starting today, your services will no longer be needed." He stayed silent, swallowed hard. "Sorry, but may I ask why?" "It's a strategic company decision. We cannot comment on details." There was no warning, no farewell, not even a sincere thank you. Just the emptiness of an ID badge being taken away and a 57-year-old man being escorted to the gate like a stranger. He left with his head held high, but inside, something had been broken. The door of the house closed slowly behind Malcolm. For the first time in a long time, he got home before noon. Evelyn, who was sewing clothes in the back room to supplement the family's income, came into the living room with her hands still marked by threads and needles. "Malcolm, are you okay?" He hesitated for a few seconds, staring at his own reflection in the window glass. Then he answered with a tone that tried to sound firm but couldn't hide the crack. "I was let go." Evelyn stopped where she was. She said nothing. She just walked over to him, hugged him tightly, and rested her face on his chest. There, the silence spoke louder than any sentence. Neither of them cried, but both felt as if the ground had shifted beneath their feet. Malcolm spent the rest of the day sitting in the same armchair in the living room. The badge was still in his coat pocket. At night, he pretended to watch the news, but couldn't absorb a single word. What hurt him the most was not the dismissal itself, but the way he was treated. Without honor, without gratitude, without humanity. In the following days, he tried to convince himself it was just a restructuring, that maybe it was really time to stop. But deep down, something was eating away at him. He knew it was more than that. Shortly before the dismissal, he had taken a stand against the new operations manager, a man named Blake Fielder, young, arrogant, and known for preferring a specific type of employee, young, obedient white man. Malcolm never stayed silent when decisions endangered employee safety. In a meeting weeks before, he had warned about a serious boiler failure and was ignored. That same week, one of the rookies almost suffered a serious accident. Malcolm saved the guy by shutting off the valve in time. But since then, he realized Blake saw him as an obstacle. Jenna, his daughter, called every day, trying to cheer him up. "Dad, you're amazing. This doesn't define you," she said firmly. But he barely managed to look into her eyes. Not out of shame, but because of an emptiness that took over him, as if everything he had built was now crumbling. That same week, Evelyn put an envelope on the table with the sewing money. "We'll figure it out," she softly. And for the first time since the day of the dismissal, Malcolm cried. Silently. Not from the pain of loss, but from the fear of becoming invisible after all. 3 weeks passed. Malcolm no longer woke up at 5:30 a.m. The coffee cooled untouched on the table, and the days seemed too long for a man who, for more than 2 decades, had lived under the strict routine of the factory. But something inside him began to stir. There were too many questions, gaps that didn't make sense. Why was he dismissed so suddenly? Why hadn't anyone from the old team even reached out to him? And most importantly, why, even after so many years of service, did the company treat him like he was disposable? It was Evelyn who encouraged him to reach out to a former colleague. "Talk to someone you trust," she said, as she served him a hot tea on a cloudy afternoon. "You have the right to know the truth." Malcolm immediately thought of Claire Jennings, the safety supervisor, and one of the few people at the company he truly respected. Claire was straightforward, loyal, and never bowed to internal injustices. He had known her since his first year at Draxon. He called her. The voice on the other end was slow to respond, but when she recognized Malcolm, she was firm. "Malcolm, I was waiting for your call." They arranged to meet discreetly at a cafe away from downtown. Claire arrived 10 minutes late, frequently looking over her shoulder. There was something in her eyes, a mix of fear and indignation. "You were fired because you spoke too much," she said bluntly. "The new manager, Blake, wanted to silence any employee who resisted. And you, Malcolm, were the voice they feared the most." She then told him that days after the accident Malcolm had prevented, there was an internal audit. Malcolm had formally reported the boiler failures, documenting everything. But the report disappeared, and Blake instructed HR to start a layoff plan targeting some old employees with outdated mindsets. The internal code used? Cultural mismatch. They covered it all up. You were a target, and I couldn't stop it. Malcolm's world spun. This was not just about age or payroll costs. It was about covert racism, about silencing those who cause discomfort, about power being used in dirty ways. Claire held his hand and said, "You can fight, but you'll need courage and proof." Malcolm left that cafe different. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't just hurt, he was awake. And there was something he wanted more than an apology: justice. That night, Malcolm spent hours staring at the screen of the old computer he only used to pay bills. He knew that if he was going to take on a company like Draxon, he would have to do more than prove his loyalty. He would have to expose what was hidden under the luxurious boardroom carpets. He went back to his old notebook, an inseparable companion over the years. In its worn pages were manual records of recurring problems, forced maintenance, makeshift part replacements, and ignored warnings, including the exact date when he prevented the accident with the new employee, a high-pressure valve that nearly exploded. But that, although valuable, was still word against word. Then he remembered. He had sent an email to the Spenceline team at the time, with copies to the safety department and even to Blake. It detailed the boiler risk, suggested a preventive shutdown, and named the young employee involved. It was a clear, technical, objective email, but when he tried to access his corporate account, the password no longer worked. The next morning, Malcolm went to the public library and asked for help. A young man named Aaron, who was on duty there, offered to help. If you used a common email client, you might have a file saved on your own computer, he suggested. Malcolm brought his laptop, and patiently, Aaron helped restore access to the local email history. And there it was. Subject: Immediate Risk, Boiler 3, Urgent Attention. Date: March 12. Recipients: 4 names, including Blake Fielder. The email was clear and ignored. Worse, it was answered coldly. Blake's message, just a few hours later, said only, "Relax, Malcolm. We don't need alarmists. Fix what you can." That was a bomb, literally and figuratively. Aaron, curious, asked why all this was so important. Malcolm calmly explained what had happened. The young man listened silently, visibly impacted. "You need to make this public. People need to know." Malcolm still didn't know how to do that, but for the first time, he didn't feel powerless. He had proof, he had an ally, and above all, he had something the company would never understand: dignity. On the way back home, he looked at the tall buildings in the city. Many were built by invisible men like him, workers who give their blood and, in the end, are erased from history. But Malcolm would not accept being erased. Not this time. 2 weeks later, Malcolm Turner's name began circulating quietly behind the scenes in the city's labor law sector. Claire had done what she promised. Discreetly, she referred the case to a lawyer known for taking on corporate giants, the kind of professional who didn't bow to money or reputation. Her name was Naomi Clark. Naomi was young but determined. She carried the demeanor of someone who already knew the twisted paths of injustice, especially when it involved silent discrimination and institutionalized harassment. She welcomed Malcolm into her modest office, with walls lined with books and framed sayings about courage, truth, and resistance. After listening carefully, she took a deep breath and said, "You weren't fired, you were silenced, and that's different." Malcolm handed her the evidence: the recovered email, the old notes, a copy of a performance review from months earlier that rated him as an exemplary employee. Naomi smiled with the calm of someone who already saw the full picture. "They made the mistake of underestimating you. That's going to change." As the lawsuit was initiated, an idea formed in Malcolm's mind, simple but powerful: to tell his story publicly. Not just to seek justice, but to give a voice to many others like him. With the help of Aaron, the young man from the library, he recorded an honest video, sitting in his own living room with natural light coming through the window. He didn't attack, he didn't shout, he just told it, in the tone of someone who had seen a lot but still believed in people. "I worked for 25 years. I gave it my all. I was let go without explanation. But what hurt the most wasn't the dismissal, it was the silence, the way I was treated as if I had never existed. Today, I choose not to be silent. For me, and for so many who still live in fear of losing everything simply for doing what's right." The video was posted on a local social network. Malcolm thought maybe a few friends would see it, maybe his former colleagues. But in less than 48 hours, the video surpassed 100,000 views. Hundreds of comments, messages of support, and similar stories began to emerge. Factory workers, women fired after reporting harassment, maintenance technicians, drivers, nurses, all thanking him for speaking out loud what many whispered in silence. The truth was no longer hidden, and Malcolm was no longer alone. The lawsuit was officially filed on behalf of Malcolm Turner against Draxon Industries for discriminatory dismissal, professional retaliation, and omission of unsafe practices. The city, used to ignoring the hidden gears of big companies, was forced to stop and listen. The first hearing took place in a discreet courthouse, but did not go unnoticed. The video's impact kept growing. Local newspapers began covering the case, and unions started to mobilize. Malcolm became unwillingly a symbol of a bigger fight. At the courthouse door, beside Naomi, he kept a calm gaze. Reporters tried to get sensational quotes from him. He, firm, answered only with the truth. "I'm not here just for myself. I'm here for everyone who was dismissed as if they were disposable. My worth wasn't erased by the badge they took from me." Draxon's defense tried to discredit him immediately. They presented empty arguments: restructuring, administrative decision, internal reorganization. But Naomi was prepared. She printed the email Malcolm had sent weeks before the accident, highlighted Blake's cold reply, and then revealed the most impactful evidence: an anonymous testimony from a current employee stating that the company was indeed eliminating those who created resistance. The judge called for silence in the room. Naomi concluded firmly. What is at stake here is not just a dismissal. It is a culture. It is the systematic contempt for those who dedicate themselves the most. Malcolm Turner didn't lose a job. He was punished for doing what was right. At the end of the session, Malcolm left the courthouse not knowing what would come next. But something had already changed. His face was printed in the newspapers, not as a loser, but as a symbol of courage. That night, upon arriving home, he found Jenna waiting for him on the porch. With tears in her eyes, she said, "You've always been my hero, Dad, but now the world knows it too." And for the first time, Malcolm smiled gently, not because the pain had passed, but because the truth was finally starting to speak louder than the silence. The lawsuit dragged on for months, like so many others. Draxen tried every possible way to contain the damage to its image. They launched internal campaigns, changed the HR department, and even offered Malcolm a confidential settlement in exchange for his silence. But he refused. "My voice is worth more than any check," he said, facing the company's legal team during one of the meetings. Naomi nodded silently. She knew that choice would cost sleepless nights, tight budgets, and an uncertain future. But she also knew Malcolm was not a man who would sell his dignity. Meanwhile, the original video surpassed 1 million views. Malcolm was invited to talk circles, community programs, and debates on dignity at work. He wasn't seeking fame. He just wanted no one else to be treated the way he was. On the day of the final trial, the courtroom was packed. Besides the press, unions, and representatives of civil rights groups, there were ordinary people, cashiers, janitors, factory workers, who identified with Malcolm's story. They didn't know his face, but they knew very well what it felt like to be discarded, ignored, silenced. Blake Fielder was summoned to testify. Nervous, he tried to justify his decisions with rehearsed phrases, but Naomi cornered him with direct questions. Finally, she presented a message exchange between him and another manager in which he referred to Malcolm as the kind of employee who hinders progress. The silence in the room was deafening. The judge paused the hearing to read the final verdict. And there, before everyone, came the turning point. The court recognized that Malcolm Turner had been fired discriminatorily and retaliatorily based on abusive corporate practices. The ruling demanded full compensation, symbolic reinstatement of his position, and, most importantly, the company's public acknowledgement of its failure. Draxen was forced to issue an official statement apologizing, with Malcolm's name prominently displayed. Outside the courthouse, applause echoed. People stood to greet him. Some hugged him, others just cried silently. Naomi, moved, turned to him. "Today, you changed more than your own story. You paved the way for many others." Malcolm looked up at Chicago's cloudy sky, closed his eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath. He hadn't just won a case. He had won against silence. Months passed since the trial. Malcolm Turner's life was never the same, and maybe that was exactly what he needed. With the settlement money, he didn't buy luxury, nor did he run from reality. He opened a small community organization dedicated to legal and emotional support for unjustly treated workers. He named the place House of Courage. On the reception wall, a single phrase hung: "When one voice is heard, thousands rise." And that was exactly what happened. Each week, more people arrived with similar stories: unexplained dismissals, ignored harassment, silent humiliations. Malcolm listened to each one with respect and attentive eyes, like someone who knew firsthand the weight of being treated as invisible. But he also began writing. He created a small blog where he told not only his story, but those of others. Simple, human, profound texts. His words traveled to places he had never imagined. He received letters from distant states, from other countries, even from executives who confessed to reflecting and changing their practices after reading what he wrote. One afternoon, sitting on the porch next to Evelyn, Malcolm received a voice message from his daughter Jenna, now graduated and working as a nurse in a public hospital. "Dad, today I helped an elderly patient who was mistreated for not having health insurance. I thought of you. I thought of what dignity is. I learned that from you." Malcolm smiled, holding Evelyn's hand tightly. Everything he had gone through had been worth it. He didn't have a grand finale, full of cameras or tributes. He had something greater, the respect of those who matter, of himself, and of a community that, thanks to him, learned that silence should never be the only option. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like Malcolm? Have you lived through or witnessed a similar situation at work where someone was silenced or treated as disposable? Comment below. Dignity can't be fired, so I'll know you stayed until the end of this story and carry inside you the strength that also touched Malcolm's heart. If this story moved you, share it with a friend or family member who is going through a similar situation or facing difficulties and needs to remember their own worth. And don't stop here. Click now on one of the real stories appearing on your screen. They also bring hidden truths, silent battles, and twists that will leave you speechless. Here at Tales That Touch, every story has a purpose: to touch, awaken, and inspire. See you next time, and remember, your story matters too.